Hello, welcome back. And of course, if you're new to this channel, welcome. My name is Tracy, and in this video, we are going to explore the rich history of the Stanley Hotel, as well as the paranormal events that take place in the hotel, even to this day. So stay tuned. The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, was first brought to us by Freeland Oscar Stanley, also known as F.O. Stanley. So, Freeland Stanley was a very wealthy man who had already had many inventions, including the Stanley steam engine automobile. So, in Stanley's time, he had a good run of luck as far as life was concerned, except for he actually had poor health. Stanley, like many people of his time, was diagnosed with tuberculosis, which is a disease of the lungs and is incurable, and he wasn't expected to live much longer after the diagnosis. So, in 1903, his doctor actually told him and suggested that he goes to visit Colorado and just be in the nature and in the fresh air. And he said that the dry, fresh air would probably be good for his lung condition. So Stanley went to Denver and stayed for a whole month and didn't really feel as though he was getting any benefit from it, until he had a friend who offered a stay in his cabin up in the mountains of Estes Park. And that is when Stanley fell in love with Colorado, because he actually did feel better in the crisp mountain air. Freeland and his wife Flora Stanley fell in love with the area of Estes Park, and so they decided to purchase property as soon as it became available, and then construction began for the Stanley Hotel in 1908. Freeland and Flora were both very musically inclined. Among Freeland's other inventions, one of them was the Stanley violin. So he actually had invented a violin, which is very rare in this day and age, as there are only about 70 remaining original violins left in circulation. So, Flora, his wife, is also musically inclined, and she enjoyed playing the piano in the music room of the Stanley Hotel throughout all of her years of life there. Even today, people sometimes hear the piano being played, even when no one is in the room. The Stanleys ended up spending most of their time actually at the Stanley Hotel, because the weather actually did seem to benefit Freeland's health. So he actually turned out to live into his 90s, making him live decades beyond what they had assumed he would live at his diagnosis of tuberculosis. So the fresh air did him well, and so did his time at the Stanley Hotel. The Stanleys were very gracious hosts who always had music, entertainment, and plenty of friendship to go around all the time at the Stanley Hotel. They spared no expense in making it a grand hotel fit for a king. The one thing that was missing was heat. This hotel was actually just a summer resort for most of the time. It wasn't until 1984 that the heat was added to the Stanley Hotel, and it is now able to be operational all year long, including in the cold winter. There are many, many spirits who live in the Stanley Hotel. It is not only Flora on her piano, but you also hear reports of a maid who is still doing her duties in the halls of the hotel. And some people even claim that in the lobby they see F.O. Stanley himself tipping his hat to them and saying hello. There's so much going on at this hotel, and so many people report paranormal happenings. And this hotel is so famous for its paranormal reputation, but mostly because Stephen King stayed in this hotel in 1974, and during his stay in room 217, Stephen King says that he experienced many nightmares while sleeping in that room, as well as seeing very dark and creepy images while gazing into a mirror while in the room, and other strange happenings. During his time in 1974 at the Stanley Hotel, that is when Stephen King wrote his best-selling book, The Shining. The Shining was also turned into a movie, and many of you have probably already seen that movie. If not, go check it out. It's actually very creepy. But anyway, so Stephen King's experience actually is said to have inspired the Overlook Hotel, which is the setting of that novel, the book The Shining. So there are quite a few wealthy and well-known names who have stayed in this hotel over the years. Back in the day, there were especially some very well-known names. In the book, America's Most Haunted, I had read this one part here that said, "The long, arduous trip up the mountain in a Stanley steamer bus was well worth the effort to those who could afford it." And notable guests include Titanic survivor, unsinkable Molly Brown, Teddy Roosevelt, the Emperor of Japan, J.C. Penney, John Philip Sousa, Harvey Firestone, and a number of Hollywood notables. So, but again, it is not only the famous people who have stayed at this hotel in the course of its history, but it's also everyday guests of the hotel who have reported back with experiences of paranormal happenings. While it's quite possible that every single room at the Stanley Hotel is haunted, it's also true that there are some rooms that are more notable than others because they come more recommended than others. There are certain rooms that people reserve on a regular basis. They come anticipating a haunting. So those very popular rooms that people request the most include obviously room 217, because that is the room number that Stephen King stayed in 1974 and came up with The Shining. But another room that is very popular is room 230. Some other highly requested rooms are 401, 408, 428, 217, 418, and 1302. So the best place to go to get some good stories about the Stanley Hotel and its paranormal reputation would be obviously from this book, America's Most Haunted, because in the book there is a personal experience by Jesse Freitas, who is the guest services manager at the Stanley Hotel. So in the book, he says, as guest service manager, I've worn many hats at the Stanley. Before my current position, I often worked the front desk. I've heard countless reports from visitors about ghostly encounters that they had during their stays. One of my favorite accounts illustrates and reinforces room 217's haunted reputation. Early one morning, I was approached by a couple who had spent the night in 217. They seemed tired, as if they hadn't slept well the night before. I asked them how their evening had been, and they responded with a question. Is that room really haunted? Yes, we believe it to be. Many of our former guests have had paranormal experiences here. Why? Did something happen to you? I intrigued. The woman continued, well, I've heard something likes to move your belongings around and stuff like that. Yes, that seems to be a frequent claim. Well, nothing was touched. Our bags were where we left them, but we both felt something in our bed last night. She was visibly shaken as she spoke. The gentleman added, I swear it felt like something was between us, physically pushing us apart. I felt it too, like an invisible but solid barrier. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke. I'm not sure my response was much comfort. Are the two of you married? Slightly embarrassed, they replied, no, we're not. That explains it. It was most likely Miss Wilson, who was very proper. She probably didn't approve of the two of you spending the night in the same building, let alone the same bed. She wanted to physically keep you apart. I sent the tired couple on their way, hoping the sleepiness would fade, but the memory of their Stanley Hotel experience would remain forever. Oh my gosh, I found that so kind of creepy. They actually had someone pushing them apart throughout the night. And it has been noted, obviously, like he stated, that Miss Wilson was very proper. And if someone who is unmarried was sleeping in the bed together, she would literally try to keep them physically separated during their sleep, just to maintain her properness, I guess you could say. So that's kind of a creepy, interesting story from some of the guests in room 217 at the Stanley Hotel. There are many other haunted rooms, many other stories. So of course, go check it out online. There are so many experiences out there for you to read through and look at about the Stanley Hotel, because this hotel is so haunted. A very popular other part of the hotel that is haunted is the concert hall. During my research of the Stanley Hotel, the concert hall came up quite often because in that area of the Stanley Hotel, it is always a party in the concert hall, every single night, all year long. That is, of course, until someone from the land of the living actually opens the doors to a completely empty room. This is a very, very, I guess you could say, paranormally active room. This room is full of people who have investigated it, receiving EVPs. And so there's a lot of contact between the spirit world and the physical world in there from those investigators. They can hear music, people laughing and being merry and joyful. And it's just always a good time in that room. So even after the Stanleys' life was over in the physical world, they got to continue on, at least in memory, at the Stanley Hotel, as the hotel is still in operation today, and people from all over the world actually come to the Stanley Hotel to try to experience the paranormal that lives within its walls. If you're interested in checking out the Stanley Hotel, I will go ahead and put the web address down below in case you want to check it out yourself. But it has spectacular views and it has spectacular, spooktacular experiences. But anyway, what do you guys think? Do you think that the Stanley Hotel is actually haunted? Or do you think that people are making this up or in some way experiencing what they think is a haunting, but really maybe it's something else? Go ahead and let us know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like. And of course, I'll see you next time. Bye.